Hi, I'm Jack Crutchfield, and welcome to Obscurely Famous Graves Minis. And what we like to do is find out where the graves are of famous people you might have forgotten about, maybe even people you never heard of. But finding the graves is a fun way to learn history and find out lots of fascinating facts. Today we're going to talk about the Booth family. And everybody knows John Wilkes Booth and how he shot Lincoln in a theater. But what you might not know is that the Booth family was one of the greatest acting families of the 19th century. John Wilkes Booth was a famous actor, but his father was even more famous before him, and his brother Edwin was an even bigger star than John Wilkes. So let's start with the father. Junius Brutus Booth, considered the greatest tragedian of the first half of the 19th century. He came to the United States from England. He left his wife there, and he brought with him Mary Ann Holmes, who bore him 10 kids, 6 of which made it to adulthood. But Booth was unpredictable, he was unreliable, he was alcoholic, and he was brilliant. He could hold people spellbound. But he would do some strange things, like in the middle of a performance, he would start crowing like a rooster, and they couldn't get him to stop. They found him out walking in a blizzard one time. He was trying to walk 50 miles. That must be why there's a book out there called The Mad Booths of Maryland. He threatened to kill President Andrew Jackson in a letter, which is an incredibly eerie read, considering that his son made good on that same promise many, many years later. And it really bothers me that these famous, incredible artists are not even remembered because their body of work is not on film. So once they're gone, they're gone. And he's become merely an afterthought to the great crime that his son committed. Junius Brutus Booth, he's buried in Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland. One of the greatest actors of his generation, and now almost forgotten. Okay, let's move on to the boys. Junius Brutus Booth Jr. was completely overshadowed by his father and his more famous acting brothers. He was a comparatively indistinguished actor, but he ended up managing theaters in Boston and eventually in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts, where he actually died. I think there's a movie by the same name. He was arrested after the assassination and jailed for a time, but he was released because he was completely innocent, and he actually supported the North. His son, Sidney Barton Booth, became a stage actor. And after some success on the stage, he actually made the transition to films. And just imagine what it was like to get into silent movies, this new thing. He appeared in 13. But to see Junius Brutus Jr. and Sidney Barton Booth's graves it's a sad thing because the cars just zip by there one after another. I've been there. And it's a classic example of history right there, and nobody even knows that they're there. Junius Brutus Booth Jr. and his son, Sidney Barton Booth. Next up is Asia Booth Clark. She was the youngest daughter of Junius Brutus and Mary Ann. She was named Asia because Junius thought that's the continent where the Garden of Eden had been located. She was an author and a poet. She wrote a book about John Wilkes Booth, a very interesting book, but it's pretty obvious who her favorite was. It wasn't published in her lifetime because she thought it would upset her husband. Now, her husband's an interesting character. His name was John Sleeper Clark. He was a boyhood friend of the Booth brothers, and he was an actor, a light comedian, but he didn't have a whole lot of success compared to when he moved to England. And they moved to England after the assassination to get away from the problems there, and he became very successful. But him and Asia led separate lives. He had a mistress. She was miserable there, and when she died, she was brought back to Baltimore to be buried in the family plot. John Sleeper Clark stayed in England. And here's a piece of trivia for you. His real name was John Clark Sleeper, but he changed his name for obvious reasons. I guess as an actor, he didn't want to have the last name Sleeper. But he was buried in Teddington Cemetery in 1899. Asia Booth Clark and John Sleeper Clark. Edwin Booth trained under his father and actually became a more acclaimed actor than Junius Brutus, but they were both the premier tragedians of their time. He was much more famous than John Wilkes was, of course, until his great crime made him known throughout the ages, but Edwin was a very depressed guy. He was an alcoholic. He was drunk the night his baby was born. His wife's name was Mary Devlin, and thereafter he swore off alcohol. His second wife's name was Mary McVicker, and she actually died in 1881. So he had a very tough life. And of course, the assassination didn't help that much. I found a recording of his voice, though. It's very fascinating, from 1890. I'm going to play you a little clip of it and see what you think. It's really rough. Pretty rough, huh? But still, a voice from the past, 127 years ago. Edwin's buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and there's also a statue to him in Gramercy Park in New York. A great actor, shouldn't be forgotten. Edwin Booth. John Wilkes Booth. There is so much information available about him, and it is such a mystery. And it was so much deeper than history portrays. He was deeply involved with the Confederacy, and maybe even elements of the North, because it wasn't just two sides, blue and gray. Both sides had people everywhere. Do your own research on this, please. There's so much intrigue. It just never stops. Here's an example. David Harold, who was one of the conspirators and was hanged, was actually in the barn with the supposedly Booth. There's a picture of him on a wanted poster, and if you'll look at it, he's already got handcuffs on him. So they actually caught him, put him in handcuffs, and then put the picture on a wanted poster. Now, why would they do that if there wasn't something secret going on? Booth's buried in the Greenmount Cemetery in the family plot, and some say it's not even him. His descendants wanted to exhume him for the DNA, but the cemetery said no, and the courts said no too. Then a group wanted to test the DNA on the vertebrae that was taken from the body. It's on display at the National Museum of Health and Science, and they said no. Pretty weird, huh? Then there was a rumor that he died in 1903, and his body was mummified, and the mummy actually toured the U.S. It's lost now. Here's a picture of a woman who claimed to be his daughter, and if you read her story, it's actually pretty compelling. Here's one last pick on the Booth brothers for you. It's the only time they played together on stage, and it was a production of Julius Caesar on 11/25/1864. And guess who John Wilkes Booth played? I got you. He played Mark Antony. That's it for now on the Booth Family. See you next time. And here's a piece of trivia for you, clear off track. One of the things I love about grave hunting is you just never know what you're going to run into. But here's the trivia question. What would John Sleeper Clark have in common with the Beatles? Give up? Well, Neil Aspinall, who was a childhood friend of Paul McCartney's and the Beatles' road manager and a top executive at Apple, is buried in the same cemetery as John Sleeper Clark. Wow, like 6 degrees of separation in a cemetery. Anyway, maybe we'll call it 6 degrees of obscurely famous graves. See you next time.